What? The Borg Queen just wants conversation. Don't we all just want to talk with somebody and shove our assimilation tubes into their neck? I know I do. I know I do. Hello interwebs, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Picard, this time Season 2, Episode 4, Watcher! That felt less awkward in my head. But regardless, I'll do my spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we'll get into spoiler-filled discussion in the back. And boy, do I have a lot of thoughts on spoilers, because I am so excited about some of the things that they teased in this episode. It just has me... my inner Trek nerd is just so freaking pumped, and we will talk about it, but I will cage it for now. Let's talk spoiler-free stuff. But my excitement aside, it's actually really difficult for me to talk about this episode spoiler-free because a lot of it is just the characters and events naturally flowing from one to the other. Like things that have been set up in previous episodes kind of are continuing and being drawn out here and are just feeling like sort of a natural consequence, not only of the events that we've seen, but of character arcs that have been progressing throughout all of this. I mean, Picard's arc starts to progress here. Raffi's arc and her guilt at Elnor's death last episode progresses here. Jurati's relationship to the Borg Queen progresses as well. And what it kind of all shows me, and I think this is my largest point that I want to make in my spoiler-free section, is how well planned out this season feels as compared to last season of Picard and even seasons of Star Trek Discovery, which is its sister series. One of the things that always frustrates me with both of those shows when it comes to their season-long story arcs is that you can really tell that the writers in those seasons were writing the story without actually having finished the end. And as we know from the way that this season was written due to the pandemic, the writers actually were able to write out the entire season before production of this season began. And you can really tell that things that are being set up in this episode are starting to be like progressed and moved further down the line. If you looked at previous seasons of Picard and Discovery, you could tell that they were setting things up and hoping that they would get to them, but without really knowing if they were going to be able to pay them off or not. But with this season, I really feel like there's this natural progression and cadence and pace with how things are spaced out, in the sense that I really feel like every episode is moving these characters forward. It's not just them running in place, and so are events moving forward, and yet it's also not feeling as disjointed as those previous seasons. Again, I like Discovery, I like the first season of Picard, but I just really feel this natural sense of storytelling that really comes when you have a story that's been planned out from beginning to end, and I'm really getting that sense from this episode. And I think you can see this confidence in storytelling, not just in the plot and progression of the characters, but the way that a lot of the themes of this season are being evoked. Ideas of abuse and trauma sort of echoing throughout time are consistently brought up here, not just in the plot and character arcs, but in like subtle small ways with like references to the Nazi past in Chateau Picard here. It was an interesting sort of evolution of those themes, and I just like them continually coming up here. And you can also feel that same sense of confidence in the way that this story is just going about talking about some of the issues that it wants to discuss. For example, there's some great little moments and cameos within this episode that I was very excited about, but it used those cameos to sort of talk about very Trekkian themes of a hope for a better future for humanity and our feelings of being disaffected today about possibly never going to reach that better future for humanity tomorrow, in using this sort of time travel idea to get at that very Star Trekian message in the face of what we are facing today, right now, and that sort of maybe more pessimistic view of the future that a lot of people are feeling. And they did it with a character that I would not have expected them to do it with, but I really appreciated the way that they did that, and that was so wonderful too. But also, as we sort of got hinted at last episode, this season is also touching upon very political and prescient themes about immigration and, let's just say it, the Department of Homeland Security and ICE and deportation and things like that. And it is not shying away from it. It is not like hiding behind a sci-fi veneer. It's saying, no, this is what it is. This is what we are going to discuss. I'm just, on all fronts, this episode is just showing to me that this season just feels more confident. And yet it's also hard for me to discuss it without the context of the entire season as a whole. So moving forward, we're still going to have to judge this episode based on how it all resolves towards the end. But this episode is just giving me more and more of that confidence moving forward that this season will deliver where it's trying to pay off in all of its ideas and themes. And that is all I can say, staying spoiler-free, though. So we're going to talk about some of the things that I am super excited for just as a nerd about this episode. But if you have not seen the episode yet, just know that we are about to dive into those spoilers. All right, now that we're in spoilers, I'm going to say we are going to talk about that ending. I am very excited about it. I have my theories, and it has me very excited as a nerd, but we'll get there in just a moment. So let's just go through the entire episode and just talk about the stuff that I want to touch upon. The opening of this episode at Chateau Picard I really appreciated because, as I alluded to earlier, I liked Picard sort of referencing that this chateau is abandoned now because of the Picards having to flee to England due to the Nazis taking over the chateau. Number one, I loved that this was a sort of discussion again of how abuse is kind of ingrained into just Picard's family history and how that sometimes gets reflected and perpetuated forward. Again, these ideas of trauma and cycles of trauma, I think are just accurately reflected in that idea. But also I like the explanation that his family fled to England, which finally explains why Picard has a British accent. It only took them, 3 decades to explain why a Frenchman has a British accent, but finally we have an explanation for it. I also love Picard and Jurati bonding here, and then also Picard kind of being stuck in his past, because again, that is how trauma and abuse happens. When someone is experiencing post-traumatic stress, they are stuck in a specific moment in the past, sort of re-experiencing it over and over again. And so I'm sure we're going to get more sort of evolution and discussion of Picard's past trauma in future episodes, but Picard ruminating on a specific moment having to do with his mother really does reflect how many people experiencing post-traumatic stress will re-experience those events. We also got a brief little Dixon Hill reference, which is not the only Dixon Hill reference we get this episode, which, by the way, for those of you who do not remember, Dixon Hill was the detective novel character that Picard liked to play way back in season 1 and 2 of Star Trek The Next Generation, so I like that little callback here. But then we also get Jurati subconsciously remembering the date that this supposed event is going to change time, which gives them 3 days in order to just figure things out. But also, as I said, I really love Picard and Jurati's bonding. I really like them connecting with each other. And also, Jurati's nickname for Picard, Mr., which I know she's used before, but it just really struck me how adorable that name is in this episode. I thought that was just very sweet. And I liked Picard when he left to go visit the Watcher, kind of gave a vote of confidence to Jurati and saying that he values her and sees her as a full member of the team. And you really could see how that deeply affected Jurati and meant a lot to her. And I think it also speaks to why she's kind of drawn to the Borg Queen, because later on in the episode, we see how Seven of Nine and Raffi, when they're in distress and asking Jurati for help, are kind of taking her for granted, and it really sort of highlights how lonely and sort of misused and misseen Jurati feels. Now, I really hope, because we are getting hints that Jurati is being drawn into the Borg Queen and being interested by the Borg Queen, and I hope it's not just going to be that she feels like disaffected by her teammates, because I always hate that storyline of, I'm turning evil because you didn't treat me good. I don't really ever like that storyline, but it does speak to her loneliness and why she would be drawn to someone like the Borg Queen. And I really like, and here's my theory, by the way, so this is my straight up theory. I think Jurati is going to be the Borg Queen that we saw at the beginning of this season, the one in the weird mask, but that she has sort of taken over the Borg. She sort of fights the Borg Queen and becomes the new Borg Queen, and she just has changed the Borg into being something more cooperative. Instead of it being something that you are forced upon you, that it becomes much more consensual. Because I understand why people like Jurati would be drawn to this idea of a collective, a group of people that all support each other and care about each other. I do see the appeal of that, just not in the very assaulting and non-consensual way that the Borg Queen does it. And so that's my kind of theory about where they're going with Jurati's arc, that she's actually going to become a Borg, but that she's going to shift it and change it and take it over from the current Borg Queen and make it into something much more consensual and positive, as opposed to the dark way the Borg have been framed so far. And that feels like such a Star Trekian message. So that's my theory with Jurati going forward. But I also loved her scenes with the Borg Queen here. I love the Borg Queen being like Agnes when Jurati needed help, and just that's all she needed to say. And Jurati actually playing the Borg Queen and saying like, look, you're lonely, we can talk, you'll have someone to talk to if you just help me. But then Jurati being like, no, I'm going to walk away and say screw you and leaving the Borg Queen alone. It just felt like a very cruel move by Jurati, and I liked that sort of cruelty coming up a little bit in Jurati. Moving on to Seven and Raffi's storyline, though, I have to first mention, in the scene where Seven and Raffi are on the bus and Seven yells at the guy to turn down his music, that is the same guy from Star Trek 4, and I love that he's just like, oh, I've dealt with this before, not doing it again.
You mind stopping that damn noise?
And I say screw you! And I hope you're blue too. We're all bloody wetland.
But beyond that, I really like that Raffi feels a sense of guilt over Elnor's death. It does feel a little bit heightened again because we never really had much of the on-screen chemistry between Elnor and Raffi. But given what it is, I do appreciate that Raffi herself is dealing with that trauma. And Seven's being very supportive, if also pushing back against her being so angry and over the top about it. It really was a nice balance between the two. And I loved their banter back and forth as they realized that they needed to leave the police station and go and find ICE agents to be able to rescue Rios. And I loved the whole bit with them stealing the police car was absolutely wonderful, and their back and forth. And I like that Raffi is sort of acting out in order to have a sense of control over the situation, that she's not really being smart. She's just trying to get control of something in her life. I also love that the action sequence that fell out of this with Seven of Nine driving the cop car wasn't really a chase scene, but was an action scene mostly based off the back of Seven just learning how to drive in Los Angeles. I mean, to be fair, every, drive in Los Angeles is a form of chase scene. I lived in Los Angeles. Los Angeles driving is that hectic, I will tell you. But I like that it wasn't like cops chasing after Seven and Raffi. It was just Seven trying to drive and then having to teleport away. I thought that was a kind of fun beat. Like, it was kind of needless action because really they could have just waited for Jurati to teleport them to where Rios was. But I also thought it was kind of fun. It had a little bit of like excitement to the episode, even if it was kind of a little bit needless in the end. But then they are there to try and rescue Rios without causing any butterflies, and that's how their story ends. Which brings us over to Rios' storyline. And again, as I mentioned in my spoiler-free section, what I'm appreciating most about this is that this season is not shying away from being very open and honest about this. This is literally ICE agents and the Department of Homeland Security says it right on their uniforms. This isn't some sci-fi like Space Force sort of thing that is enacting these prejudices. It is literally the American institutions that we have today, and it feels very real. You can tell that they had an advisor or sensitivity reader for these sections, because the way that these ICE agents treat Rios and look down upon him and insult the other men that are there and sort of abuse their power, again, feels very real to many of the reports and things that we saw, not only under previous administrations, but even today when it comes to immigration enforcement in the United States. It is honestly horrific, and I really appreciate the show just not shying away from that. And I also like the small, subtle things that were referenced here too, like with Dr. Ramirez when she's talking to Rios. She literally states, "This is my second time that this has happened to me." Like, she is a citizen of the United States, and yet this is something that she's kind of gotten used to. And so I really like also Rios reflecting that you would have been a hero and not vilified in my century, and him not being able to tell her that, but also understanding like she's a good person trying to do her best to help those in need. And sadly, she does not live in a time that rewards that sort of thing. I also liked Rios sort of standing up to the ICE agent by literally just stating the Starfleet story to him, and I liked his joke about like, I literally don't know what's going on with Picard being a synth. No one can explain it to me. It was very much lampshading it, but in a very funny way. So I appreciated all of that storyline with Rios, and I think that I just appreciate the confidence that this show has by depicting that. But then this brings me over to probably the most exciting part of the episode for us Star Trek fans, and that is Picard going to meet Guinan at her bar. I have many things to say on this. I mean, let me just talk from a nerd perspective before I actually get to the more like writing perspective of this. Number one, I will say I was a little bit like, why is this called the 10 Forward Bar in the 21st century? Like, I get why it would have been named that in the 25th century. Guinan ran 10 Forward on the Next Generation Enterprise D, and so her having named the bar that in the 25th century made sense to me. But the fact that this bar existed in the 21st century and was still called 10 and was on Forward Avenue was kind of like, okay, that feels a little bit fan servicey to me. I don't think that she would have named the bar that in the 21st century when we know that it's only coming out of the fact that 10 Forward was a bar on the forward deck of the 10th deck of the Enterprise D. It's a small thing, but it just bothered me a little bit. But jumping to things that didn't bother me, though, was I really appreciated that they recast Guinan. I know people might have a problem with them casting a younger version of Whoopi Goldberg, but I liked it because I always get frustrated with things like the way Disney is doing in Star Wars and other places with this sort of like deep fake de-aging technology that even Picard, the show, has used a few times, like with Brent Spiner this season and with John Delancey earlier. But I always like kind of appreciate more them not using this weird technology that they just cast an actor to play the part, because that's what actors do, and I don't mind characters being recast, especially if it's given the blessing of other actors, which presumably, given that Whoopi Goldberg is in this season, she did give her blessing to this. And the actress who plays Guinan here she is so good. She number one, her hair looked amazing, I just want to say that, but she was just so forceful, and she gets across that sort of like ageless wisdom, and yet also the disaffected feeling that Guinan is having right now. And I think that her disaffected feeling kind of reflects what a lot of us are probably feeling today, that this sort of bright future of humanity that Star Trek depicts is almost unattainable now. Like, after everything that we've experienced over the past few years, there is a lot of doomerism in today's culture, and I mean, kind of understandably so. But I like that she voices that, and even says things like, facts aren't even facts anymore, like very much speaking to today. And Picard still stating and reaffirming, like, no, these moments can be used as catalysts for change, but humanity can become better, and just reaffirming those Star Trekian ideals in the face of this doomerism that I think we are all feeling. And Guinan being the one to reflect that, considering she was also the one that always would say that to Picard, I think was really smart and a kind of nice, beautiful reflection on Trek themes and ideas and how it still can remain prescient today, even amongst all this hardship that many of us feel today. And I like her also calling things out like, who has the ability to have patience today? People who look like you, like old, balding, white, presumably well-off dude like Picard, as opposed to a black woman like Guinan looks like. It all just speaks to those ideas, and I really appreciated the show giving voice to it. Though, getting nerdy again for a hot minute about things that frustrated me a little bit as a fan is I was a bit bothered by the fact that Picard himself just didn't mention to Guinan that they had met before back in the 19th century, because we know from the episode Time's Arrow from The Next Generation that Guinan had met Picard. And I would get her not recognizing him immediately, considering that he was just a dude she met for 2 weeks, like 300 years ago or so, something like that. And I get like her not immediately connecting the dots, but Picard should have at least mentioned that he was the Picard that she had met before. And it was a little bit confusing to me, because when he does mention that his name is Picard later on, that could have been her realizing, oh, I've met you before from Time's Arrow, but that's never really stated. So I don't think it was entirely clear. And so it came across as like a little bit frustrating for me as a Trekkie. And I feel like it might be a little bit confusing for new fans of the show who have not seen The Next Generation to understand why she knew who he was when she heard the name Picard. So I wish they had been a little bit clear on this episode's relation to Time's Arrow. And I was a bit frustrated they didn't just mention that he had met her before. And I get why he wouldn't right away, considering he wanted to preserve the timeline, but I just wish they had connected the dots a little bit more in a clear way for either us Trekkies or for possible new fans.
Do you know me?
Very well.
Do I know you?
Not yet. But you will.
But this brings me to the end of the episode and the thing that had me so excited, because Guinan brings Picard to meet the Watcher, and this whole scene was super creepy, like walking through Echo Park and the Watcher like jumping between bodies and the white eyes was just super cool and definitely creepy, all leading up to Picard meeting the Watcher, who is Laris, who takes him away in this cool effect where like they teleport through like this door in smoke. It was a really cool effect. So I don't really know what's going on with the fact that this is apparently Laris being the Watcher. We'll have to see a little bit more next episode to be able to get a little bit more hints of what's going on there. However, my theory about who this Watcher is that it's going to answer one of my favorite and coolest mysteries in all of Star Trek, and one of the oldest mysteries in the entire franchise, going back to Star Trek the original series, and that is, I think she is related to Gary 7 from the episode Assignment Earth, the season 2 finale of Star Trek the original series. For those of you who don't know, Assignment Earth was a backdoor pilot that was done by Gene Roddenberry in case Star Trek had gotten canceled at that time, which featured Kirk going back in time to meet this guy named Gary 7, who was an agent for some mysterious aliens who were there trying to protect the timeline, protect Earth, and steer it on the right course. And again, it was a backdoor pilot. It was meant to be this sort of like mystery around like him just sort of going around and saving the day and saving Earth stuff. Very 1960s type of sci-fi storytelling, could have been very episodic. But that show never got picked up for series because Star Trek got renewed after a Reddit lighting campaign, and so Assignment Earth never really got picked up. And so there was always this mystery within Star Trek mythos of who were these aliens that Gary 7 worked for. It was never an answer that was really meant to be answered within Star Trek history, again, given that this was a backdoor pilot, but it is something within Star Trek canon that never got addressed. And when I was younger, I always loved that idea of like there was these aliens that were manipulating Earth and trying to set things on the right course. It just spoke to this like larger universe of Star Trek that we never really got answers to, and I was always so enthralled by that mystery. And so for them to possibly, don't know for sure yet, possibly relating to Gary 7 and that sort of same mystery of these people sort of watching Earth and sort of trying to direct Earth in a specific course has me so excited. I really hope that that's the direction that the show is going. That's my nerdy theory on the possibility of who this Laris Watcher person is, but we will have to see more starting next episode. However, this does bring us to the final scene of the episode, which also had me incredibly excited, where we have Q sort of narrating to this girl who apparently works at this Europa, space exposition thing, and she's reading a book, looks like a Dixon Hill book, written by Tracy Torme, who was the writer of the original Dixon Hill episodes of The Next Generation, so a nice little Easter egg there. But Q's sort of talking about fear and how she's going to be overcome by fear, so I don't really know who this character is. I'm assuming we'll learn in our next episode, but the biggest thing here is that Q tries to snap his fingers, and it doesn't work. And Q seems surprised by that. So it's going towards, again, something is wrong with Q, and I am so curious to see what's going on with him and why he even wants to manipulate the timeline to begin with. So he's clearly trying to mess with stuff, but also still something's wrong with him. So I'm just so curious to see where this storyline is going with Q, and that ending just has me deeply, deeply intrigued. So that is all my thoughts for this episode of Star Trek Picard Season 2. I am so excited by this season. This show has completely turned itself around for me. I am just each week getting more and more excited for the way that this story is being told and where they're going with it as both a Star Trek fan and just a fan of good storytelling. Like, I really think they have nailed this show so far this season, and I'm just so pumped and excited to see it continue for hopefully the rest of the season. We'll see if that continues though, but this episode I just can't tell you how cool it feels to be excited about this show. Star Trek is it just makes me so pleased. It makes me so pleased. I'm such a happy Trek fan. Anyways, that's my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts though down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more of my Star Trek reviews, news, reviews, reactions. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my other channel, Jessie Gender, where I do sort of video essay stuff there as well. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper, my friends.